You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Paula, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have back Paula Fontenelle. Paula, welcome.
Thank you so much, Guy. Thank you for asking me to come here again.
You are welcome. So, for more than 20 years, Paula has worked as a Brazilian journalist, but that all changed after the suicide of her father in 2005. After experiencing this trauma, she decided to dedicate time to preventing suicide. Since then, she's trained in psychoanalysis and just finished her master's in clinical mental health. For more than 12 years now, she's been helping families deal with this kind of loss and those who are at risk for self inflicted death. Paula has completely transformed her trajectory after losing her father, and she would love to inspire others to reframe their loss and find other ways to deal with their pain. Paula's book is titled Understanding Suicide, Living with Loss, Paths to Prevention. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So, remind everyone who may have not heard your first episode where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm from Brazil. I'm from a city in the northeast of Brazil called Recife. So if you look at the map of Brazil, it has kind of a point to the right. We often make fun of Recife. We say it's the closest city to Africa because it's right that tip of Brazil on the
Okay.
right. That's where we are. But we have beautiful ocean, warm, which is something I really miss, Guy, because here in the West Coast, you know how it is. You look at the ocean, it's beautiful, but you can't even touch it because it's freezing.
Yeah.
So I live in Portland now on the West Coast,
Let me
Portland,
ask,
Oregon.
are you able to adjust your screen so that it doesn't cut off the top of your head there? There we go. Yeah. All
Better?
right, perfect. Yeah, perfect. So, all right. So, last time we talked a lot, but give our listeners a thumbnail sketch of how this started for you.
Well, it started with the death of my father, which was something very unexpected. And not only his death, but suicide itself for me was the unknown. It was something that happened in movies or with someone very distant. I had never lost anyone to suicide, not friends, family members. Not that we know, because as we know, there's so much silence, right, when suicide happens. But I had not experienced it. So to me, it was something so shocking when I lost my dad. I just came to a place of confusion, awe. I didn't know why it happened, and I kind of jumped into it with full force. I wanted to understand. I needed, that's how my brain works. That's how I deal with pain. I need to understand it. So I started reading compulsively, and talking to family members, looking for support groups. There was nothing in Brazil. Just to
Mm,
give you an idea, when I decided to write the book, and I published 3 years after the death of my father, it was the first book written for the general public in Brazil
oh
about
my
suicide
gosh.
loss. I mean,
And you
that's
were a
how
journalist at the time.
I was a journalist at the
Okay.
time. Yes, that's what I did. So, and actually, I did that because I wanted to fill that gap, because I wanted information, I wanted answers, and I couldn't find it in Brazil. So, but that's what started it. The confusion in my mind, the hundreds of questions. Some of them never get answers, and that's one of the hardest things with suicide grief, because you just have to sit with the unknown for so long. But that's how it began.
Did you uh, find out why your father
Mhm.
committed suicide?
Yes, I did. And if you allow me, Guy, because I really worry about language when it comes to suicide.
Hmm.
We avoid saying commit. I know this is general public. We all say it, and sometimes I catch myself doing the same,
Hmm.
because commit is associated with the stigma, and it's associated with crime. So you commit a crime. So we try to say when they attempted suicide or completed suicide.
Okay.
So Yeah, so I did, and I do believe in the value of knowledge and understanding, Guy. I really did because it helped me, and I see in support groups, I facilitate support groups for those who lost loved ones to suicide, and as you know, I have a podcast, and just today, this morning, I was interviewing someone who lost her husband to suicide, and it really makes a difference to bringing clarity and
Hmm.
understanding and compassion when you try to understand what leads someone to suicide. Of course, that's individual, but there are some things that are common to that, like the lack of hope. We all have problems, we all go through crises throughout our lives. But the moment you lose hope that that's going to change, that can be a huge trigger. So when I look back at the history of my father and what was going on at the time, so just to give you an idea, he had divorced my mom, I don't know, 4 years before he died. So that loss was huge for him. And they'd been married for 30 something years. He had re-engaged in a new relationship with kids. She had kids. So he felt responsible. For him, it was like beginning a new family, right? So my father had this huge sense of responsibility. He was a family man. And at the time he was 68. Well, when he started the relationship, he was like 66. But then two small kids that he felt that he needed to, to raise them and to support them, including financially. He was having a lot of financial difficulties at the time. So the relationship, I don't know if it was good for him or not, but there was just so much. And
Mm.
again, he had opened a new like a new business. It didn't work out. He used all his savings on that. He was having a lot of financial issues, and that was really, really hard on him. So when you put that all together, I actually saw that there was I could tell that I was helping him, like even financially, and trying to organize his life and everything. And I could tell at the time, because it's so hard for us to see the signs, but at the time I could tell that he was struggling a lot. And
Hmm.
I actually did approach him, and I asked him to see a psychiatrist. I said, Dad, you need to see a professional. I mean, I'm trying to help you, but this is beyond,
Right.
my capacity. And he did. He actually did go see a doctor. He was diagnosed with depression, but a proud man, military man. He used to be in the army. His
Mm.
generation, how that generation deals with mental illness and this kind of challenge. He never did the treatment, never went back to the doctor, never took the medication. So when you put that all together, now looking back, but at the time I needed to understand. I really
Right.
needed answers, and that's very common with us loss survivors.
Well, I would think so. I mean, I can't imagine going through that and experiencing what you did, but it would seem to me like just as a human being, how did this
Yeah,
happen? How could this
yeah,
happen?
yeah.
Let me ask you something. You mentioned your podcast, which is called Understand Suicide. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. And I kind of feel this is kind of a controversial topic,
Hmm.
maybe even a controversial question, but is suicide ever the answer, quote unquote?
Hmm.
And is it for one? Is it like there are uh some thoughts like, well, who am I to tell this person not to
Yeah,
complete suicide?
yeah, yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah. Because as a survivor and as someone who works on suicide prevention, I deeply believe, and research shows too, that most of the times you can help. So, and for them, Guy, when you ask me, is it ever the answer? Certainly for them, their mindset at the time when they attempt or complete suicide, that's the only answer. And that's what we call the constriction or the tunnel vision, right? That's the only thing that you see as a way out.
Right.
I try, this goes with the sense of responsibility that many of us have after they die. We think about all the what ifs, right? What could I have done? How come I didn't see? What if I had done this? What if I had listened? I have my what ifs. Everybody does. Even when you don't feel guilty for the death itself, you feel guilty about something, like the
Mm-hmm.
relationship you had, for example. But I feel that someone's life is not your responsibility. My responsibility is only for my life. And of course, I'm not saying that you can be a jerk and you can be abusive to someone, because that doesn't matter. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that when it comes to guilt and when it comes to suicide, we should never feel responsible for that
Mm-hmm.
death. Because at the end of the day, the decision to be alive is ours alone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I approach responsibility and how I approach, is it ever the answer? I can't answer that.
Right.
Right
But
now in my life, it's not. And I understand and I know by fact, by research, by science, and my experience with it, that most suicides can be prevented. And
right,
that's how I approach it.
right. I mean, you mentioned the constriction, and I think with the understanding that each case is different, people are different, of course, but I think it's fair to say that in many instances, when people are thinking about committing suicide, they are in such a restricted, constricted frame
Yeah.
of reference, so depressed that is the depression is completely altering their frame of reference. How can you make what's considered a healthy, right, choice in that moment?
Yeah. Yeah.
So right, I think in one sense, I'm feeling like that's not a healthy choice. You can't
Mm-hmm.
make a healthy choice from that perspective, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, what is your goal with uh, your work and with the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, obviously called
Mm-hmm.
Understand Suicide? But what are you trying to help people with?
Two things. But before I talk about that, you were talking about depression. And I think it's important to say that we used to have a number that we used for many years. The 90% or over 90% of cases of suicide were related to mental illness and especially depression. That's the number one, right? But we know that that's not true anymore. In the US, for example, we know that more than half of the suicides are not related to a mental illness or a diagnosis per se. So it's a crisis. It's that constriction that we're talking about. Sometimes it can be impulsive, but just saying that because we think that, oh, if you're depressed, maybe you, of course you are at more risk, but most people with depression don't even think about attempting suicide. So I just wanted to
Right,
clarify.
right. But there, you mentioned the commonality, which is what, hopelessness,
Yes,
right? And that
hopelessness.
is oftentimes attributed,
Yeah,
well, one of the elements of depression. But so is it
yeah.
fair to say that most people who, uh, or many slash most people who do commit suicide are hopeless?
Most of them, yes.
Okay.
Hopelessness. The other one that's very common is the sense of being a burden to others.
Mm,
And this is great for us to explore because it goes against this misconception. I know that there is this useless dichotomy of, oh, is this an act of bravery or is it being a coward, right? Oh, they're
mhm,
so selfish. It's quite the opposite. Those who and we hear that from people who of course survived an attempt, that they talk about how I felt, and we see that in letters. Today I was interviewing this woman who lost her husband, and he sent her a text and he
mm.
posted on Facebook
Oh
that
man.
yeah, saying goodbye to his friends. And when you read it, it's all about being a burden. They do believe that they're a burden, and it's not a selfish act. It's actually them believing that your life will be better without them. And I did that. I saw that myself. My dad sent me a letter 2 days before he died. So he sent me a letter I received 2 days after he died.
What?
And that was the content of the letter. It was all about, I know it's going to be hard now, but you'll be better off without me. They believe that's part of the constriction. That's part
Mm-hmm.
of the mindset that they have and that where they are at that moment.
Mm-hmm. My understanding is that when people say it's selfish is that they're not thinking about how it's going to impact other
Of course.
people,
Yeah.
right? Um, but so okay, so your my question was to you, like,
My
what do
work.
you yeah, what is your
Yeah.
goal with your work?
Two things. I work on prevention with families and loved ones who lost someone to suicide. And when I say that's prevention, is that because all of us, if we lose someone to suicide, you have a higher risk of attempting suicide or dying by suicide. That's a risk factor. So when you work with families and loved ones, you are actually preventing suicide. I
Mm.
want to bring them comfort. I want to bring them stories and different experiences. And that's why I interview so many people who lost loved ones to suicide, because they always bring a message of hope. Okay, here's how I dealt with it. Look at
Mm-hmm.
me. This is I was where you are a few years ago. This is where I am right now. I work with support groups. They're great. I honestly believe it's the best thing for someone who lost a loved one to suicide is to go there and to see they're not alone. So I
Mm-hmm.
want to bring comfort to those who lost loved ones. I want to bring them a message of hope. I want to empower them with tools in how that they can help themselves and how they can go through their grief process and journey. But also on the other side, I want to help those who are in that with that mindset, the constricted mindset.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only way out. I want to talk to you and tell you, no, there are other ways. Here's what we can do to help. So I work on those two areas.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. The support groups sound incredible. Your podcast sounds amazing. I want to get into that. But as you're talking, I'm thinking about uh, in the suicide on a continuum, in a sense.
Mhm.
On this end, you're not thinking about it at all. On this end, you're getting ready to attempt. It is it a slow progression? I mean, I guess it can be many things, but you know, when someone is moving along that progression, becoming more and more constricted in their thought, becoming maybe more and more feeling as though they're a burden. How do we see that? How does one recognize that? How do you help? Can
Yeah,
you
yeah.
help?
You can always help, and that's a wonderful question, because we tend to think that suicide is like a flip, right? You're well, something happens, the trigger happens, you die.
Right.
And that's not it. And this is one of the best ways and approaches to help someone who is suicidal, is to try to see where they are. So I'll just go through this continuum that you mentioned. So you're okay, right? And then you start having suicidal thoughts for whatever reason. The progression goes suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation. Even those who have ideation doesn't mean they have intent. They don't really want to do that. The ideation is there, and I've interviewed you can see on my podcast people who have ideation, dealt with suicide ideation all their lives and still do, but they never move towards intention. This is what I'm going to
What's the
do.
difference between thoughts and ideation for people?
Ideation is more frequent. It's like there all the time. it's
Okay.
it's the it's one of the answers. If I have this problem, I have this and this and this option. Suicide is another one. It's always there. So it's not one moment in your life when you were a teenager, you were struggling, you broke up a relationship, and you thought about suicide, or you thought about never waking up. That's kind of a passive kind
Mm,
of suicidal thought. So it's something that happened, or maybe happened twice in your life. Ideation is something that's always there, and some people really struggle with that. it's
mm,
it's that voice, the internal voice repeating that that's an option. How about this as an option? So that's the ideation. And then you move towards intention. So, okay, I get it. That's an option. How can I do it? I want to do that. That's ideation with intent. And then you go towards planning, right?
mm-hmm,
Okay, the next phase is, okay, I'm going to plan it. And the next one would be attempt and completion. So that's the full continuum. So how do you find out where they are? You ask. You say, listen, where are you right now? I see you're struggling. Are you thinking about suicide? Is this something that happens frequently? How many times has it happened? Is it a constant in your life? When did it start? So you just start asking questions with compassion and compassionate curiosity. That's how I call it. It's not because you want, you want to to ask these invasive questions. No, you want to spot where they are. And if they say, yeah, it's always there. It's really hard right now. So, well, have you thought about it? I mean, how you would do? Do you have any plans? You just
Mm-hmm.
ask. You go,
Mm-hmm.
keep in mind the continuum, and you ask these questions to know, have you planned doing it? And then you can identify, and they'll be honest. I mean, if you ask with compassion and with no judgment, no musts or shoulds or how can you or anything like
Right.
that, with compassion and without judgment, they will tell you. And in my experience, Guy, is that they want to tell people, they want to get that out, but they're
Mm-hmm.
so afraid of the reaction
Mm-hmm.
because it's a scary thing, and it's natural that it's scary. No one wants to have that conversation. So I try to identify where they are, because depending on where they are, there are different things that you can do, right? And the one very important thing is, if you can, don't take it all upon yourself to do that. Involve more people
Mm-hmm.
with of course their consent. Ask them, who else can we bring into this to help you? It can
Mm-hmm.
be professional help, it can be a friend, a family member, a teacher, whoever you can think of. But yeah, it's important to see where they are so you can really provide help.
Right. And of course their level of intent is huge on that. And it's one thing to for a therapist to be doing this. Is another thing for a family member
It's hard.
can be really, really challenging.
Yeah.
Um, so let's say it is a family member who's inquiring of another family member or a friend. And I think your suggestion to bring other people on board with consent is a really useful
Mm-hmm.
one. It's about getting in there and, like you said, being compassionate and
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, it's so tough, isn't it? The one thing that I believe it's helpful to think about, if you have someone that you know who is struggling, maybe with mental illness or just having a personal crisis, whatever that is, I think before you have that conversation, you have to sit with yourself. That's very important. Ask
Mm.
yourself, what are my views on suicide? What are my biases on suicide? How will I react to it if they say, yes, I'm thinking about suicide? Am I ready for that? That's very important, because that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be so transparent when you have that
Mm-hmm.
conversation. It's going to be in your body language, in your facial expression, in the way that you push away if they say yes. So get ready for the conversation. Be mindful about that. Be mindful about yourself and how you may react. Are you ready? And you may come to the conclusion, I can't do it. Bring somebody else.
This is
Maybe
tough. This is
it is.
hardcore. You talked about
I
bias.
know. Even I talk about this all the time, and now I'm having goosebumps.
You talked about biases. Talk more about that. What are some of the biases we, as a culture or culturally, people experience or feel?
Well, the main one is it's selfish, right? Do you think that that suicide is a selfish act? Because if you do, here's how this conversation is going to go. How can you do that to your family? How can you even think
Mm-hmm.
about that if the person says yes, right? Do you think that's going to be helpful? No. So you have to ask yourself those hard questions. How do I see it? Especially if you have a history of suicide in your life. Have you had suicidal loss? Or let's say you are the husband or the wife or the partner. The first thing that comes to you is, this is suicide is a message about a relationship too. That's how it feels to us. I was not enough.
Mm.
My love for him or for her was just not enough. How could he do that to me? So how can you even, especially if you have kids, think about your kids? So all this kind of reaction can come out if you're not ready for that. If you're not really mindfully present for that person. It's not about you. This is the moment when you have to kind of put your biases in a drawer, close it shut, breathe in, and try to understand where they're coming from. because that's where the answers will come from. Oh, I'm feeling alone. I'm so isolated. I don't have anybody in my life. Let's work on that. Or I was just fired from my job, which for many of us is a huge loss, right? Again, it's a message about ourselves. Well, okay, so let's work on that. When you ask the questions, you're going to see some of the answers on how to help too, because will believe me, they want someone to listen. They're just afraid of it. Most of the times, the other bias that we have, it's a myth about suicide, is if you talk about it, going to put the idea in their heads.
Right.
Forget about that. It's the opposite. That's a myth about suicide. And I love to break that myth and bring it down, because it's the opposite. They want to talk about it, but they don't know how. They're afraid of your reaction. And there are, of course, all these cultural things that come up that make it really hard. And they're afraid that you're going to maybe hospitalize them, right? Because you're not ready to really listen and maybe identify that it's just a thought that just came up. It's not about intent. It's not about planning. So that's why it's so important to know where they are too.
You mentioned that, correct me if I'm wrong here. You said that oftentimes it's about relationship too. What did you mean by that?
No, I think that for us, when we lose someone to suicide, the way that it lands on us is he sent to the world a message about us, about our relationship, that I was not enough.
I
That's
see.
how it feels, but not necessarily true. Because there is volition involved, right? It's very different from any other kind of death. He chose to do that, or she chose to do that, because all of this was just not enough. People are going to think, and people think. This woman that I interviewed today, she was telling me about how hard it was for her to be blamed for the suicide. It happens so often with the partner. They're left. How can you not see it? How could you not see it? How come you didn't help? How come you didn't tell us? Or maybe you had a fight. It was your fault. She had a fight with him one day before, and that's all they remember. All the time they were together, it's erased, because we think the first question we ask is why. The second one is who is responsible. We don't even notice, because we search for answers. That's what humans do. We need understanding. We need to have answers for things. But unfortunately, the answer is not who is responsible. No, the choice was his or hers. There might be some circumstances like relationship problems that they were having, or they just got divorced, but that doesn't mean that it was somebody else's fault.
One of the things that make this so
Even you, I mean, you interview people, you're like, I'm lost for words.
well, it's just
Yeah.
it's Paula, it's so outside of my realm of
Yeah.
understanding. I don't know anyone who has committed has
Died of
completed
suicide.
suicide.
Yeah.
But it's obviously such a final act that it's hard not to think, it's hard not to feel like, what could I have done? Is there anything I could? How does one get all the way to that point,
Yeah.
without what anyone else seeing or helping, or it's just, and it also just feels, for someone to complete suicide, it almost feels like it goes against our drive to live.
Of course. Yeah,
Well,
it
that's
goes.
exactly what it
It
does.
totally does. It goes against our most basic uh need, right? Our most basic instinct, the instinct of preservation, self-preservation. And Guy, I've been studying this for almost 20 years now. I've been working with all these people. I interview people. I wrote a book, all of that. And I still, when someone, oh, he died of suicide, why on earth can you, how? Yeah, I still come up with, okay, let's go back. Because of course it's unnatural. And it's
That's the word.
shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's unnatural for us. So I get it. I get it, and I still feel it. So, but how couldn't they see that there was another answer? That maybe if they waited a little bit more, or maybe if, and just for that, I have a friend of mine, in teenagers. As you know, brain is not developed. So very close friend, 15 years old, the kid was one of those brilliant kids, straight A's, a great athlete. Everything was perfect. He had a girlfriend, a good relationship, had many friends, until one day that he went out with friends. He drank a little bit more than normal. And when he came back to, I think, to school, I don't know if they did a test or something, but he was kicked out of the team.
Mm.
Suspended, not kicked out, but suspended. That's what it took. He
Wow.
came back home, killed himself.
Oh my gosh.
And still, every time I talk to her and say, yeah, how can you ever? How can you ever understand? It's very different from someone like my dad. I see all the signs now. I see all
Hmm.
the difficulties. I see all the things that I found out about his childhood after he died, and I get it. But there are some like that are, out of impulse. It's impulse. And no, you will always say, why? How can you? And there's nothing wrong with that question as long as you try to put yourself in their shoes and you understand and you try to dig out the context in which it happened.
Hmm.
Don't go and jump to the first question. I mean, who is responsible, right? Where is the responsibility? Because they're not here. The truth is they're not here. They'll never answer. You never really know. And that's one of the things. The hardest things for us is you will never get the true answer, the 100%. It's all understanding. You go back and you think of the situation and their, sometimes family history, dynamics, all of that. But still, you will never know because you're not them.
Is there? I mean, is there always a reason for this? I mean, there's right.
Yeah, there's a trigger, not
Well,
a
triggers. But I'm talking about a reason that someone
reason.
does it. Right. A trigger is something that leads someone to complete it. But
Hmm.
is it safe to say that there's a reason why people commit suicide or complete
There
suicide?
is, yeah, there
Yeah.
is a reason in their minds. I can read to you. I believe I have the note. Yes, let me find here
Oh
the
God.
note that this person wrote on Facebook, and
Mm.
and we'll get there. So here's what he wrote. Let me just find here the note. Yeah, he didn't laugh. Family, just a minute, because here. I'm so grateful for the friends and family that I got to spend time with throughout my life. Thank you all. Please remember the good parts about me and forgive the bad parts. The truth is, I have always been broken. I've been broken for a long time. I always try to focus on the good and to be happy, but I could never quite get it right. I know I'm hurting a lot of people for doing this, and I cannot express enough how sorry I am for that. So, this is when you read this is a person who was in profound pain. But
Mm.
was it something that happened the day before? No, he says
Hmm.
it himself. I have always been broken.
Wow.
So when you
Oh, that's
read
heart
that,
wrenching to listen
yeah,
to.
it's the sense of it was never going to work out. I tried.
Right.
So many, many times that's what it is. People who have a past history, they've never maybe never tried to process that and never searched for help. Maybe they overworked all their lives or got into substance abuse to numb their pain. It's so many times that's the reason. It's the sense of brokenness for him. So when you say, is that a reason? Oh, there was a trigger, yes, but the reason is he always felt hopeless, and he just
Hmm.
got to a point where when he reached the limit. It's heartbreaking. It really is.
You mentioned, let me just remind everyone, speaking with Paula Fontenelle. Her book is called Understanding Suicide, Living with Loss, Paths to Prevention. And her podcast is called Understand Suicide. Um, you mentioned the many benefits of support groups.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, support groups are really magical. I had someone the last no two to my I do one of the support groups is monthly, and that's usually how they are. And
And
I
these are
remember
support groups for whom?
for suicide loss only.
Okay.
It's for grief, suicide grief. So only people who lost someone. And in my group, sometimes I change it, but right now most of them are very recent. So within the last year, 2 years,
Mm.
one of them 3 months ago. So very recent losses. And I remember one of the women who came in. She sat down, and I always say in the beginning, you don't feel like you have to talk. Some people here came to talk, they need to process something, but it's totally fine if you just want to listen. That's healing too, because
Hmm.
it helps with not feeling alone. And I remember someone, uh, I asked her to, I don't know, I just talked to her and she said, sorry, I can't talk. And said, that's fine. So the next month, but she listened, she stayed there for the whole session. And then next month she came and she talked. So to me, that this is such a great relief because they're moving, right?
Hmm.
The grief is moving, the healing process is in movement. So support groups are great because half of the pain, Dr. Edwin Schneidman always said that, my mentor, part of it, half of it is the pain in suicide, half of it is the pain, and half of it is being alone with it.
Mm.
So you come and you see, wow, I'm not crazy like I thought I was. I
Right.
thought I was going crazy. But now I listen to these people, everybody's saying these things, and I identify so much. I'm not alone. But it also brings you hope because you see, you come in like this, one of these ladies that came, she lost her brother to suicide 3 months ago. But she will look at someone who lost a brother to suicide 5 months ago and she'll see, it gives you hope to say, wow, maybe I'll get there. And of course, it's a very safe space. We always say you can curse, you can cry, you do your grief. Nobody here will judge you. And that's one of the preparations that I do every session. I say, we're not here to judge. Everybody here can do whatever they want, talk about in whatever language they want to talk. We're not going to say don't do it, no shoulds. So this is a place to be yourself. So it's a very safe place for you to say, I'm angry. I'm really angry. Last 2 weeks ago, we had a session and it was all of it. That's what came up. Anger. Everybody. Once one talked about it, because it's the hardest thing, guy, to talk about someone you loved who died and say,
Hmm.
I'm so pissed. I'm
Hmm.
so angry at them. And that's one of
Hmm.
the differences in suicide grief. Because with other kinds of grief, like disease, accident, you don't feel angry at them, right?
Right.
You feel so many other emotions, but anger is not that. And it's very common with suicide loss. So once one brought it up, everybody's just joined because it's hard. You don't tell your best friend, I'm so angry at him or at her. It's something that people don't. How can you be angry? They died, right? It's really hard to talk about it. So support groups are great for that. The space that you don't find with your loved ones and friends, you can come here and feel safe to talk about your loss without being judged.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about, all those people sitting in that group
Mm.
and just wondering, um, I'm thinking to myself, if I had experienced something like that, it's almost, you can't help but wonder, did I reach out to that person enough? You know, and here I am sitting in this grief group wishing I had done it. It almost, it's like the other side of the coin is we need to connect with each other,
Mm-hmm.
now before it's too late, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't know what's going on with people.
No, we don't. We don't, and we are not ready to deal with uncomfortable emotions, right? Grief is about, oh, I'm sorry for your loss, and then you disappear. It's about getting over it, right? You get what, 3 days of mourning or something when you lose someone. You can miss your work, but it's all about
Right.
moving on. It's about moving on, right? Get rid of the stuff. So it's grief is really, the way we see it in our culture is not helpful at all, not at all. And when it comes to suicide, it's even worse, but it comes with even more silence and weight and
Mm,
blame and guilt. When you were talking about, well, I am sitting and thinking, I should have reached out more. But here it is. You are in a group that everybody's thinking that.
mhm,
I have never met anyone who doesn't deal with some form of guilt. As I said, not necessarily with the guilt for the death, but I could have been a better son, or I could have been a better. There is always the what if. What if I had done this, or what if I had done that? But I love that you say that. Yes, look at your loved ones. I mean, really look, pay attention. Someone is more isolated. Are they,
mhm,
moody maybe? They're different. They just seem off. We say that a lot. Oh, the person just seems off. Ask. Just sit down and ask, because we don't know. We're all struggling with something, right? But you don't know
mhm.
until you ask.
How, we talked about your own father's suicide and the work you're doing. And Paula, yeah, I do talk to a lot of people, but this is so friggin' intense.
I know.
How do you walk through this? How do you do this journey? How do you manage this?
By leading the life I preach, Guy. I believe in self care. I believe in finding joy in your life, little bits of joy every day. And I 100% believe that the best thing for all this feeling of isolation that we have is relationships. I
Mm,
see friends every week. I meet with them every week. I meet my sisters every week. I am always in touch with my loved ones. I believe in the power, the heal. We get broken by relationships, but we get healed by them. So
mm,
surround yourself with people who love you. I believe in that and I live it. I do a lot of self care in terms of joy, and I craft a lot. I'm a crafter. I craft every single day. I take breaks. I take care of my health. I do exercise 4 or 5 times a week. So I really live the life that when I talk to my clients, I say, listen, it works. Take
mhm,
good care. You have to take care of. If I don't take care of myself, I could never do this work. It's too much. And I
mm,
have friends who do the same kind of work. Not many, because as you know, even clinicians do not want to do this work. But I have a couple of friends that I reach out. Wow, this today was really, some days are really hard, and say, well, let's just talk about it. Let's go for a walk. Go for a walk. It's simple as that, and it will
mhm.
help you. So I take very good care. My husband makes fun of me because I'm always coming into the house, and I go, I need to relax a little bit. And he always looks at me and says, you're really good at that. I'm always taking breaks. So, but I have to because it's important. Otherwise, I could not do what I do.
Well, I am so glad you joined me back on the podcast, and I'm as I began talking to you, I was quickly reminded of why I wanted you back on this podcast. You're incredible, Paula. Really, this is
Thank
such
you,
a
Guy. Thank
heart
you.
breaking topic, and that your reading of that note was heart wrenching. My God.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the work you do is so inspiring, and I'm just happy there are people like you out there who are doing it. How can people get in contact with you?
Well, you can send me, you can see my website, understandsuicide.com, and you have a contact tab, but just send me an email to understandsuicide@gmail.com.
Okay.
And I think that's the best.
Now, your support groups for grief, are they
They're in
online, in
person.
person?
They're
They're in
in
person.
person. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you live in Portland,
Okay.
you're welcome to come.
They sound
Just
amazing.
contact me, and
Okay.
I'll add you to the group.
Okay. Paula, thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you so much. Because not everybody wants to tackle this subject, so I'm really glad that you did. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I appreciate you. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.